Did it, right?
Where is he from? His father-in-law?
He lives in L.A.
L.A.?
All right.
Baron, you'll adjust the camera. It's on already, but just you have to turn it to the. Excellent.
I didn't see the other.
Oh, excellent. Is it possible someone put it back on the shelf? And they want to check in there, and so maybe someone put it back in
Don't
there.
worry, I'll listen to it.
That's the worst, when someone puts it away where it belongs.
To go, you never find it.
Okay, this is what we need to do today. We're on 4b, Daled Amud Beis. We're discussing.
Shkoyach.
Very good. We're discussing a statement from Rav. Rav said that the omer, the carbon omer, which is brought from flour, from barley, if it's brought for the wrong intention, not only is it not effective, but it's also invalid. The explanation for it is, because it needs to be effective, what does the omer do? The omer allows you to eat the new grain. It means that until the omer, until that sacrifice, until this barley sacrifice is brought, you have to always eat the old grain first. You have to wait. You know, like when you go to the store and there's dates on the milk.
It's only barley?
Well, it's brought from barley, and it comes along with the sacrifice.
Oh.
But you know, there's dates on the milk. So of course you buy the one that has the newest one. According to the Torah, when it comes to the grain, nope. You have to finish the old grain until the omer time. Once the omer comes, then you can start to take from the new grain. But first you have to take, you can't start eating the new grain until the omer. You finish up the old grain. So the omer is matir. It allows you, or it's machshir, it allows you to eat the new grain. And since the omer was brought for the wrong intention, so because it doesn't allow the new grain to be eaten, so the omer itself is invalid. And then Rav went on and he said that the same thing would apply to an asham mitzayra and an asham nazir, because these two allow the person, the nazir or the mitzayra, to recalculate or to come back into the camp. So because they're machshir, they allow. If they're not effective, then they're invalid. That's what Rav said. The question that we had was, we had Mishnayos that discuss, or a Mishnah in the beginning of Zvachim, that discusses which sacrifice are invalid if they're brought for the wrong intention. We said two, a chatas and a carbon pesach. So we said, so why didn't we mention the asham nazir, asham mitzayra, according to Rav, is also invalid? So we said that we didn't want to get into the details of which asham is yes valid, which asham is not valid. So because there's certain asham that are valid, even if they're brought for the wrong intention, asham gazelas and asham milah, that's valid, and there's other two that aren't valid. We didn't want to get into that. We just wanted to have a general rule. Chatas is always invalid, and that's all we said. Chatas and Pesach is invalid. So the Gemara asks the question, how come some of them are valid and some are invalid if they're brought for the wrong intention? He said because some of them are machshir, some of them allow something to happen, and some of them are atonement. we said if it doesn't allow something to happen, so then it's invalid because it doesn't. It's not successful at its function. So therefore, we say the whole thing is invalid. What about any sacrifice? It's not successful at its function. It didn't atone. If you have to bring another one, that means it didn't atone. So why do you say that if it doesn't atone, it's still valid? If it doesn't, if it's not successful at its function, it should just be like the Omer and the Asham Nazir Asham Mitzvah, that it wasn't successful at its function, it wasn't effective, so it should be invalid. 4b.
Number 4.
Dalit. Is that, what does that say there? Maybe one page back. No, they're 2 pages back. But you got to turn back more. Mendel show. Turn back to 4b. Where your fingers? Yeah, right there. Is that 4?
5. Yes. Bottom.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. We're discussing the difference between sacrifices that are machsher and sacrifices that are mechaper. Machsher means that they allow something new to happen. For example, the Omer allows the grain to be eaten. The Asham Nazir allows the Nazir to restart his Nazirus. The Asham Mitzvah allows the Mitzvah to come back into the camp. As opposed to, on the other hand, other sacrifices that atone. They atone for sins. We said if it atones for a sin, even if it's brought for the wrong intention, the sacrifice is valid, but you have to bring another one. Sacrifices that have a function that they need to have some effect, so if they don't have that effect, they're invalid. There's no, yes, it's valid, but you need to bring another one by those. It's either valid or invalid. There's no in the middle there. We're asking why. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, "Matzinu shechalak hakasa ben mechaprim ben machshirim." We find in the Torah already that there's differences between these 2 types of sacrifices. It says mechaprim, atonement sacrifices, and machshirim are sacrifices that allow something to happen. Like the Omer allows the grain to be eaten. An atonement sacrifice, it's possible that it can come after the owner passed away. For example, an owner's bringing a sacrifice, and he doesn't get a chance to bring it, and he passes away. If it's a sacrifice of kapara, the inheritors can bring the sacrifice for the deceased. However, machshirin, sacrifices that allow the person to do something afterwards, like a mitzvah or a nazir, les b'das alachamisa. It doesn't come after the person passes away. And so therefore, once we're seeing a distinction, so we see that the Torah makes a distinction, and therefore we'll also make a distinction by which one is valid. The Tanan, as it was taught in the Mishnah, Hayisha Shevichatasa, talking about a woman that gives birth. After she gives birth, she has to bring sacrifices. An oila and a chatas, a burnt offering and a chatas. Now here, these sacrifices are actually the opposite of what it normally would think. You would think that the chatas is the atonement and the oila is the machsher. The burnt offering allows her to bring other sacrifices. Or it turns out that the chatas allows her to eat sacrifices because she was impure. Turns out that the chatas allows her to eat sacrifices. So this is the machsher, and the oila is the mechaper in this case. It's different than normally, but just accept that for now. So she brings her chatas. That means she's now allowed to eat from sacrifices. Umesa, but she dies. She didn't bring her oila yet, which is the atonement in this case. Yaviu yarshim oilasa. The inheritors can bring the atonement. Oilasa, let's say she brought the atonement sacrifice, Umesa, and she passed away. La yaviu yarshim chatasa. The yarshim, the inheritors of this woman, do not bring the sacrifice that would allow her to then go on and become back into the community to eat sacrifices. So you see that the Torah makes a distinction between machshirim and mechaprim, and so therefore we'll say that machshirim that are brought for the wrong intention are invalid, just like they're not brought after death. And atonement sacrifices that are brought for the wrong intention are yes valid. You have to bring another one, but the sacrifice is valid, and they are brought after death. Clear? Mechaprim, atonement, are brought after death. They're also valid if they're brought for the wrong intention, except for a chatas, which we said is not valid anyway, based on the Mishnah. Okay, all of this was to distinguish between certain types of hashamas that are brought for the wrong intention. Some are valid and some aren't. Some aren't valid. Why is that distinction? We distinguish between machshirin and mechaprim. Depends what's the function of the sacrifice. Is it allowing the person to come back into the camp, or is it an atonement sacrifice? Atonement sacrifices are still valid. Machshirim are not. Maskefla Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, has a question. Machshir nami milespa da asul achamisa. By machshirin sacrifices, these functional sacrifices, do these not come after death? I'll show you that they come after death as well. V'atanan, it was taught in the Mishnah. Hamafresh masla nazirusai. Someone that separates money for the nazir sacrifices. He's a nazir, and at the end of the nazirus, he has to bring sacrifice. He has to bring 3 sacrifices. He has to bring a chatas, an oila, and a shlamim. If it was impure, he would bring an asham. But he has to bring 3 sacrifices. So he designates money. That money, you're not allowed to use. But if you do use it, you don't violate me'ilah. Me'ilah means you're taking personal benefit from things that belong to the temple. Why not? Because inside, because technically he could take that money and use it all for that single sacrifice, which there's no me'ilah in, which is the shlamim, the peace offering. Because the peace offering is eaten by the owners, it's of lesser holiness. There's no me'ilah in that. And he designates money, but he didn't say exactly for what. So it could be that all that money is shlamim money. And so there's no me'ilah there. You're not allowed to use it for personal use, but if you do, you don't violate the me'ilah rules. Because it could have been all shlamim. Mace. Let's say that this fellow dies. And he has money that's not designated for the individual sacrifices. And he's a nazir. So it says, Yiplu l'nadava. You give it to the donation, and that's referring to in the temple. They would take sacrifices and they would bring it on the altar when the altar was empty. Mufurashin. But let's say you put it in separate envelopes. This money's for this money's for that, and this is for that. So Dmei Chatas, the envelope that says the Chatas on it, that money, Yoylech Liyam HaMelech. You have to throw it into the sea. That's the rule. A Chatas that the owner dies, you have to throw away the money. If it would have been an animal, the animal would have to be left to die. Leinenim v'leimayalim. You're not allowed to use it, but if you do use it, there's no me'ilah there. Because it's made to be lost. Dmei oila. Let's say, what about the envelope that has his money for the oila sacrifice, the burnt offering? Yavi bem oila. Then you bring an oila. The owner died, but you still bring the oila. Umaylim behem. And the oila has me'ilah. If you use it, that money for personal use, you've used something that belongs to the temple, and it's a serious violation. You have to bring a asham if it was unintentional, or if it's death by heaven if it's intentional. Dmei shlamim, what about the envelope that has for the 3rd sacrifice, the peace offering? Yavi bushlamim benachalam liyayim echad veintun lechem. You don't have to bring the bread along with the shlamim. However, the shlamim is brought. The Gemara asks now, after we quoted this brayso, ilu shlamim denazir hamachshirim ninavakasa lachar misa. What are you saying? The oila and the shlamim allow the nazir to drink wine. These are the completion of his nazirah sacrifices. They're functional sacrifices. They do something. They have an accomplishment. It's not just atonement sacrifices. And we said that these functional sacrifices are not brought if the owner passed away. And here we're saying that they are brought. The owner passed away, you take that money, and you still bring the sacrifices. So Amar Rav Papa, Hachikama. This is what Hachikama. This is what Rabbi Yirmiyah meant to say. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hachika Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. This is what Rabbi Yirmiyah says. We don't find a specific functional sacrifice that comes after death. However, by the Nazir, it's a functional sacrifice that has a specific accomplishment, but it's not designated specifically which one is going to allow him to drink wine. Why? The Amar Mar, because the Master taught. We're now on the top of 5a. If the Nazir shaves his head, which he's not allowed to do while he's a Nazir, but when his Nazirus is over, he is allowed to. He shaves his head after only bringing one of the sacrifices. It doesn't matter which one. He's fulfilled his obligation, and it's satisfactory. That means that it's not specifically the oila, it's not specifically the shlamim that are machshir, it's either one. So when does Rabbi Yirmiyah say that a korban that's a machshir is not brought after death? That's only when I have a specific one that's brought. But by the Nazir, it could be this, it could be that. Those are brought after death. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. It's a very strong question on Rav. Quotes a brisa. Asher mitzayir shenishchat shlei l'shmai. A mitzayir brings his guilt offering, and he brings it for the wrong intention. He brings it for a different sacrifice, for a different owner. Or the blood was not put on the thumbs, or the ear, the blood is put on. The sacrifice is valid, it goes on the altar. You have to bring the wine and oil that comes along with the sacrifice, and the flour. However, you still have to bring another sacrifice to allow the Nazir to go to drink wine, and I'm sorry, I'm not talking about a Nazir, I'm talking about a Mitzayra. To allow the Mitzayra to come back into the camp. So we have here an Asham Mitzayra that was brought for the wrong intention, and it's still valid. Rav said clearly an Asham Mitzayra that's brought for the wrong intention is invalid, because since it doesn't accomplish what it's meant to be accomplishing, it's invalid. So we have a brisa that contradicts Rav. The Gemara says, Tiyufta de Rav, Tiyufta. That's how they add in over there, that there's an extra. It's a question on Rav. It's a very strong question. You see Taisvos? Mendel? Tiyufta de Rav? Taisvos says that the Gemara did not need to conclude like this. The Gemara could have said that Rav argues on the brisa. Hey, all rise.
Order in the court.
Yeah, this is good. This is Aaron's. We're on 5a, right on the top. The Gemara could have concluded, according to Taisvos. Taisvos says the Gemara could have concluded that Rav is, because Rav is the first generation of Amiroim, and he was a student by Rebbe as well, he could be considered a Tana, and he's allowed to argue on a brisa. So he's a difficult one to disprove, because when the Gemara quotes a brisa that clearly contradicts Rav, the Gemara could say, well, Rav argues, and you can't end up with Tiyufta. But Taisa says, could have answered that. It didn't, for whatever reason. It happens to be that not everyone holds that Rav is a Tana, and you can argue. It's a question of what his status is. So the Gemara sometimes will say it, and here we see that it didn't. Okay. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar. The Gemara spells it out in full. It's instead of Reish Lakish. Here it says Reb Shimon ben Lakish. That was his name. He says differently. Again, Rav is in south. I Iraq, in south of Babylonia. Rish Lakish is in the north of Israel. So they're at the same time. They're contemporaries. They're just very different locations. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar, Minchas Omer shecomes to Shleil Shmas Ksheira. The Omer, it's brought on the second day of Pesach. The Kmitz is done. However, it's done for the wrong intention. The Omer is valid. However, you have a problem. Remember that the Omer is brought from the new grain. When are you allowed to eat the new grain? After the Omer is brought. So the Kmitza is brought from the Omer. However, this Omer is a valid sacrifice, but it doesn't serve its function. It doesn't accomplish. So therefore, you have to bring another. It was the wrong intention. You have to bring another Omer. What about the remnants of this Omer? You're not allowed to eat it because you didn't bring the Omer yet. You need another Omer that's going to be functional. That will accomplish it, and then you'll be able to go back and eat this Omer. Okay. The Gemara asks a very important question. It says, we're going to skip the brackets. Mekarev hechi karva. How are you allowed to bring the sacrifice? We have a rule. Mimashke Yisrael. It's based on a pasuk in Yecheskel that says what's permissible to the Jewish people to be eaten, that's what you're going to bring as a sacrifice. And if a Jew cannot eat it, so then how can you offer it on the altar? Minamutal Yisrael. You're only allowed to bring on the altar things that are kosher. And this sacrifice is not kosher to a Jew to eat, because it's the Omer before the Omer, right? Amar Ravada Barava says, Kasav Rish Lakish, we're going to have to figure this one out. Rish Lakish holds, Ein Mechusar Zman L'Bay Bayayim. Very interesting. The way I can explain this to you is, I don't know if they still do this, but if you have checks that are coming in and out of your bank account, so sometimes you go under or over, it depends on when the checks are coming in. So sometimes, like at midnight, they look at your balance, and if you were under the sum total of everything by the day, then you get an overdraft or whatever. But throughout the day, it didn't really matter. They didn't really put it in. It's at midnight that they put it in. So here the Gemara says that Rish Lakish holds that because a sacrifice is going to be brought later that day, so the sacrifice that's brought earlier, the Omer sacrifice, is even though you can't eat it now, but because later in the day you'll be able to eat it, so it's still considered a valid sacrifice. Because later in the day it's going to be valid. So therefore, I can still put it on the altar now. It's not considered that it's too early to be eaten by a Jew, because later today it will be allowed to be eaten. It's like it's going to be permissible later today, so it's not a problem. My example with the check is not it doesn't match perfectly, but it's saying that you don't look at it by the hour of the day. You look at it by the end of the day. And since by the end of the day it's going to be valid, it's valid already now to be brought, even though a Jew can't eat it right now. Masav Ravada Breder Rav Yitzchak. Ravada, the son of Rav Yitzchak, has a question. Yesh ba'oifes shein b'menachos. Quotes a brisa. Bird sacrifices are different than meal offerings. Yesh b'menachos shein ba'oifes. And meal offerings are different than bird offerings. What are the differences? It says Yesh ba'oifes, the bird offerings, she'oifes ba'im b'nid b'shnayim. Very interesting. Two people together can donate birds. Let's say, look, let's bring sacrifices. Two people. They can take, it could be a partnership. A mincha not. Let's skip the parentheses. Umachusri kabara. People that have not brought their sacrifices yet, because they were impure, they had a baby, whatever it was, or a mitzayra, a zav, a mitzayra. So in order for them to come back into the community to eat sacrifices, along with, like everyone else that's able to do that, totally pure, back, as a member as a holiness, to be involved in that. So they bring bird sacrifices, not mincha. They bring bird sacrifices. Skip the parentheses. V'hutru mechlal isuran. Also, birds have a leniency that is prohibited outside the temple. What is that leniency? That they're slaughtered with the fingernail. Outside the temple, that would be forbidden. B'kodesh. Hutru mechlal isuran b'kodesh. That's how you read it. And they have this leniency in the holies. In the temple, Masha Enkim b'Menachos, which you do not have any of these things by the meal offerings. Okay, what the Gemara is going to ask is that we just said that there's a leniency by birds, that there's something that's acceptable in the temple, but that's not acceptable outside the temple. We said that's only by birds, not by a korban mincha. If you accept Reish Lakish's view that an omer that's brought, but it's not valid, why? Because the intention was wrong when the omer was being brought. So a Jew can't eat it, but it still could be put on the altar. So you're seeing that there's a leniency in the temple, that the altar can, yes, eat it, consume it, and a Jew cannot. But we just said that this is only by birds that you have a leniency, that it could be performed in the temple, but not outside the temple. What was the leniency that you use the fingernail? Outside the temple, that would be nevela. But we said that it's only by birds and not by mincha. So the Gemara is going to ask, if you accept Reish Lakish, I'm going to show you a case where a korban minchas omer, is acceptable in the temple to be consumed by the altar, but not outside the temple, but not for the rest of the... Okay. Now the Brisa continues, even though this is not really part of the question, but the Brisa continues with the opposite, just to complete the Brisa. Yesh b'menachos, there are certain things by a korban mincha, by a meal offering. Sha'menachos tu'unis keli. After you do the kmitza, you have to take that the scoop in your hand. You did it. You took the scoop. You have to put it into a vessel, a holy vessel, and then it's brought to the altar. Utenufa, it's waved. Vahagasha, it's brought close. Someone was telling me, there were Quakers, and were there Shakers also? Was that another Quakers and Shakers? Yeah. You never heard that? I never heard that, but someone told me recently.
Like German Shakers.
And they
Movers and Shakers.
but I think it had to do with the two ways that sacrifices were brought. They would move them like this, or move them up and down. It has to do with the tenufa. It was a spiritual type of thing, and not, whatever. Everything comes from the Torah, and then it gets whatever. Hagasha, it needs to be brought close to the altar. It's a special performance that's done with a korban mincha. There's communal menachos, meal offerings, just as there are individual mincha offerings. All of this is a list of things that are only by meal offerings, not by birds. There's no communal bird offerings. There's only sacrifices and meal offerings that, for example, the omer, or the two breads and Shavuos. Mashenkim ba'ifas, birds do not have this. You don't have to take the bird and put it into a vessel, and etc. V'imis, and if you're going to accept what Reish Lakish said regarding the omer, the menachos nami mishkachas la, by a korban mincha, by a meal offering, a flour offering, we also find the hutra mechlal isurim b'kodesh, that it has a leniency, it has an acceptability in the temple, which is not acceptable outside the temple. My knew which case is that? Minchas omer, the korban mincha. Korban mincha, which was invalid because the intention was wrong. We said you still put it on the altar, even though a Jew can't eat it. That means it has an acceptability in the temple that's not acceptable outside the temple. The Gemara answers, Kivan dein mechusers man labay bayayim lavi surahu. Since Reish Lakish holds that because later in the day it's going to be permissible to the Jews as well, outside the temple, to be eaten, rather. And I don't mean this outside the temple. I mean it's off the altar. It's permissible off the altar. So therefore, it's not considered it's not considered that it's not permissible off the altar. It's considered permissible off the altar because later today it's going to be permissible. Like we said before. Okay, Masav Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes has a question. And this question is going to be a question on the answer that we gave. That we're going to consider everything that's going to be permissible later today as already permissible. It's not so clear. Hiktim matan shemen lamatan dam. The way this works is that a metzora is supposed to put the blood of the sacrifice on his thumbs, and then afterwards he's supposed to sprinkle the oil, and then he's supposed to put the oil on the thumb where the blood was. Sprinkle the oil inside the sanctuary. The oil gets sprinkled. He has a jug of oil gets sprinkled, and then the oil is put on. However, let's say he put the oil before he put the blood on. It's no good. You have to fill up the jug and redo it again, and you put the blood on his fingers, on his thumbs, after the blood was put there. Matan b'hoinus lamatan sheva. Let's say he put the oil on the thumbs before it was sprinkled. You have to redo it. If you're going to accept your answer, that anything that's going to be allowed to be done, allowed to be performed later in the day, is considered like it's already done. So why do you have to redo these performances, these activities, since later today you're going to sprinkle the blood? So you put it before, so it just gets pushed in because later today you're going to be allowed to do that. If you're going to accept that theory, like I gave you the example with the check, that later today everything adds up, so we just calculate it by what happens at the end of the day. If you're going to accept that theory, that logic, then why do you have to redo putting the oil on the thumb? Because you didn't do the blood yet. Later today you'll do the blood, and that will be counted as if it was done. Why do you have to do it? My David, what you did was perfect. Rav Papa responds, Shani Elchas Mitzayra, you're confusing things here. By the Mitzayra it's different. The Ksiva Behu Havaya. It says, it is. It uses that term, it will be. This is the verb. That it will be, it is. And because of that verb, that havaya, which haya is that was, is, or will be. So because of that verb, that